Have you ever watched a movie so many times that you start noticing things that just don't quite look right? A shadow that shouldn't be there, a prop that suddenly changes between scenes, or a background detail that seems completely out of place. Well, if you ever sat down and really paid close attention to The Sound of Music, one of the most beloved films in cinematic history, you might be surprised by just how many hidden bloopers, behind-the-scenes secrets, and fascinating contradictions are hiding in plain sight throughout the film. The Sound of Music was released in 1965 and went on to become one of the greatest box office successes of all time. Directed by Robert Wise and starring the incomparable Julie Andrews alongside Christopher Plummer, the film swept audiences off their feet with its breathtaking mountain scenery, unforgettable songs, and heartwarming story. It won 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, and remains a staple of family movie nights around the world. But behind all that magic and magnificence, there are some truly astonishing details that most viewers have completely missed over the decades. Let's start with something that might completely change how you look at the opening scene of the movie. That sweeping, iconic shot of Maria twirling on a hilltop in the Austrian Alps is perhaps one of the most recognizable images in film history. It looks absolutely effortless and joyful on screen. But the truth behind that scene is far more uncomfortable than it appears. The helicopter used to capture that breathtaking aerial shot was flying so close to Julie Andrews that the powerful gusts from its rotating blades kept knocking her off her feet. She reportedly had to pick herself up from the ground multiple times during filming. So every time you watch that glorious opening and marvel at how free and happy Maria looks, just remember that Julie Andrews was essentially being blown over by a helicopter over and over again just to get the perfect take. Speaking of things not being quite what they appear, let's talk about the Von Trapp mansion itself. The stunning house you see throughout the film looks like it belongs entirely in Austria, and the production team did an extraordinary job of making everything feel authentically European. However, sharp-eyed viewers who watched the film multiple times have noticed that certain details about the house and its surroundings shift slightly between scenes. The positioning of furniture, the appearance of certain props, and even the lighting in some of the interior shots change in ways that reveal the scenes were filmed at different times or on different sets entirely. The filmmakers were working across multiple locations in both Salzburg, Austrian studio sets in Hollywood, California, and occasionally the transitions between these different filming environments created small but noticeable inconsistencies that made it into the final cut of film. Now here is something that will genuinely make you look at the movie differently. The character of Captain George Von Trapp is portrayed throughout the film as a cold, disciplined, almost emotionless man who runs his household like a military operation. He summons his children with a whistle. He keeps them dressed in matching outfits, and he seems to have drained every ounce of warmth and music from the family home. It's a very specific character choice that drives the entire emotional arc of the story. But here's the blooper that history itself exposes. The real Captain George Von Trapp was reportedly nothing like this at all. People who actually knew him described him as a warm, loving, and deeply musical man who actively encouraged his children to sing and play instruments long before Maria ever arrived. The film essentially invented a version of this man that never existed. And if you look closely at the historical record, the cold, whistle-blowing captain on screen is almost entirely a fictional creation. The real man behind that character would likely have been quite shocked to see himself depicted that way. Then there's a fascinating story behind Father Franz Wasner, a real person who played an enormous role in the Von Trapp family's musical journey, but who was completely erased from the movie without most audiences ever noticing his absence. Father Wasner was a Catholic priest who discovered the family's extraordinary musical talent and worked tirelessly to develop and refine their abilities as a performing group. He was so central to their success that one writer later described him as the driving musical force behind the Trapp family singers. He even fled Austria alongside the family and continued touring with them throughout Europe and the United States. Yet when the filmmakers sat down to adapt the story for screen, Father Wasner simply vanished. In his place, they created a fictional character named Max Detweiler, a cheerful impresario who helps arrange the family's musical performances. The reason for this substitution was apparently quite deliberate. The filmmakers felt that having a priest serve as the central musical mentor might overshadow Maria's role in the story, so they replaced a real historical figure with a fictional one and hoped nobody would notice. Most people never did. Let's talk about Maria herself, because the real woman behind Julie Andrews' gentle, soft-spoken portrayal was an absolutely fascinating and vivid personality who bore very little resemblance to the character audiences fell in love with. The film presents Maria as shy, uncertain, and quietly charming, someone who stumbles into the Von Trapp household almost by accident and gradually wins everyone over with her gentle nature. But the actual Maria Augusta Kutra was something else entirely. By her own admission, she was an incredibly energetic, rule-breaking, chaotic presence at Nonberg Abbey, the convent where she lived before going to work for the Von Trapps. In an article published in 1980, she described herself in terms that are almost a complete opposite of her movie counterpart. She talked openly about breaking dishes, talking when silence was required, running to the convent courtyard, and even climbing onto the roof of the building. She once admitted that she used to whistle Gregorian chants, which are among the most sacred and solemn pieces of music in Catholic tradition, essentially turning holy music into something playful and irreverent. The real Maria was not quiet. She was not shy. She was a firecracker, and the movie's version of her, while charming, is a carefully softened and simplified interpretation of a woman who was far more complicated and colorful in real life. And while we're looking more closely at Maria's story, there's another significant detail that the film gets completely wrong in a way that completely changes the emotional logic of the love story at its center. In The Sound of Music, the romantic tension between Maria and the captain builds gradually over the course of the film, and they eventually fall in love and get married just as the Nazi threat is closing around them in 1938. The timing of their wedding is presented as urgent and emotionally loaded, as if they are rushing to build a life together before the world falls apart around them. It's dramatically effective, but it's historically inaccurate in a way that fundamentally misrepresents their relationship. In reality, Maria and George Von Trapp were married in November of 1927, more than 10 years before the Nazis ever marched into Austria. At the time of their wedding, Maria was just 22 years old and George was 47, a significant age gap that the film also glosses over. More interestingly, Maria later revealed that she didn't initially marry George out of romantic love at all. She married him because she had grown deeply attached to his children and wanted to stay in their lives. She even suggested that if George had proposed to her directly and romantically right away, she might have said no. It was only gradually, over years of shared life together, that her feelings deepened into something that could truly be called love. The sweeping, rushing romance of the film is a beautiful invention, but the real story was quieter, slower, and in many ways more genuinely moving. Now, let's look at one of the most visually dramatic moments in the entire film. The scene where the Von Trapp family makes their daring escape from Austria by hiking through the mountains in the dead of night. It's a pulse-pounding sequence that has kept audiences on the edge of their seats for generations, and it perfectly captures the terror and uncertainty of their situation. But here's the thing. It didn't happen anything like that. According to official records and interviews stored in United States National Archives, the family's departure from Austria was actually remarkably calm and organized. They left during the day. They took a train. They behaved as if they were simply going on an ordinary trip, calmly telling anyone who asked that they were heading to America to perform concerts. There was no midnight mountain crossing, no breathless scramble through the darkness with children and luggage in tow. The family was accompanied by Father Wozner and their secretary, and they traveled openly and systematically, moving first to Italy, where George had obtained citizenship due to his birthplace, and then onward to London before eventually boarding a ship to the United States. The dramatic mountain escape that has defined the film's climax for 60 years is almost entirely a Hollywood invention designed to maximize tension. One of the most surprising bloopers hiding in plain sight throughout the film involves the names of the children themselves. Any viewer who watches carefully and knows even a little bit about the real Von Trapp family will notice immediately that none of the children's names in the movie match their actual names in real life. The film features Liesel, Friedrich, Louisa, Kurt, Brigitta, Marta, and Gretel, 7 children with charming, distinctive personalities. But the actual children from George's first marriage to Agathe Whitehead were named Rupert, Agathe, Maria, Werner, Hedwig, Johanna, and Martina. The filmmakers changed every single name and also adjusted some of the genders and personalities to better serve the story they wanted to tell. Most remarkably, the real oldest child was not a 16-year-old girl named Liesel, who sings romantically about being on the verge of growing up. The real oldest child was Rupert, a man who was already in his late 20s and working as a qualified doctor by the time the family left Austria. The iconic song 16 Going on 17, and the dreamy young character who performs it, is a complete invention with no basis in the actual family's history. And here's something that surprises almost everyone who learns it. The real Von Trapp family was not the picture of aristocratic wealth that the film presents. The movie shows them living in a magnificent estate with an army of servants, beautifully dressed children, and absolutely no financial concerns whatsoever. The captain appears to have unlimited resources, and the family's material comfort seems entirely secure. But the truth was considerably more difficult. During the Great Depression of the early 1930s, the Von Trapps, like millions of other families around the world, suffered significant financial losses when their bank collapsed. They were no longer able to maintain their large home with a full staff, and they were forced to start renting out rooms to lodgers just to make ends meet. It was partly this financial pressure that led them to begin performing publicly as a family singing group, an endeavor that Captain George Von Trapp was initially quite reluctant to embrace. His daughter Eleanor later recalled that it almost hurt her father to see his family performing on stage, not because he was ashamed of them, but because he was a deeply private man who wanted to protect his children from public exposure. The gleaming wealth on display throughout the film was a generous Hollywood upgrade from the more modest and financially strained reality the family actually lived through. There's also the matter of children the movie simply pretends don't exist. The film features exactly 7 children, and audiences have grown so familiar with this number that it feels like a defining feature of the story. But George and Maria actually had 3 more children together after their marriage in 1927, none of whom appear anywhere in the film. Their names were Rosemarie, born in 1929, Eleanor, born in 1931, and Johannes, who was born in 1939 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, after the family had already arrived in the United States. That means the real Von Trapp family had 10 children in total, 7 from George's first marriage and 3 from his marriage to Maria. The movie quietly erased 3 real human beings from the family story, presumably because adding more children would have complicated an already complex narrative. But it means that viewers who have watched The Sound of Music dozens of times have been watching an incomplete picture of the family the whole time. Behind the camera, there were also some extraordinary stories unfolding that most audiences have never heard. The casting of Captain Von Trapp was apparently one of the most difficult challenges the production faced. Before Christopher Plummer was approached, the studio reportedly considered a remarkable range of actors for the role, including Bing Crosby, Yul Brynner, Sean Connery, and Richard Burton. Director Robert Wise had become convinced that Plummer was the right choice after seeing his work on Broadway, but Plummer himself wanted nothing to do with the project. He turned the role down repeatedly. He wasn't interested in the character as written and didn't think the film was the right fit for his talents. Wise was so determined that he eventually flew to London specifically to meet with Plummer in person, where he promised that the character could be developed and deepened in ways that would make the role more compelling. Plummer finally relented, though he reportedly never developed much affection for the film during production, famously describing it in unflattering terms in later years. The fact that one of cinema's most iconic performances was delivered by an actor who didn't particularly want to be there is one of Hollywood's most delicious ironies. And finally, consider the extraordinary financial story surrounding the film itself, a real-life drama that rivals anything on screen. By the time The Sound of Music went into production, the studio behind it, 20th Century Fox, was in genuinely desperate financial trouble. They had sunk an astronomical amount of money into their epic production of Cleopatra, a film whose budget had spiraled completely out of control and ballooned from an original estimate of $2 million to a final cost of over $44 million. Although Cleopatra made money at the box office, it wasn't nearly enough to offset the damage, and the studio was teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. The Sound of Music was essentially a gamble taken by a studio that was nearly out of options. When the film opened in 1965, nobody was entirely sure how audiences would respond. Musicals had been losing popularity, and there were genuine concerns that the wholesome, old-fashioned feel of the story might not connect with modern viewers. Those concerns turned out to be spectacularly wrong. The film became the highest-grossing movie of 1965, and by the end of 1966, it had overtaken Gone with the Wind to become the highest-grossing film of all time, a record that Gone with the Wind had held for 24 consecutive years. The Sound of Music didn't just become a beloved classic. It literally saved an entire film studio from financial collapse, which means that every blooper, every historical inaccuracy, every changed name and invented scene somehow contributed to one of the most improbable and wonderful success stories in the history of Hollywood. So the next time you settle in to watch The Sound of Music, pay close attention to the details hiding in every frame. The story you think you know is only part of the picture. Behind the music, the mountains, and the magic, there's a far more complicated, surprising, and fascinating truth just waiting to be discovered.